we start. I'm a new member of the Broomfield Museum. Do you know what my favorite part of being part of this museum is?
The people.
Thank you. It is all of the amazing people and all of the incredible stories. Everyone has a story, and you all have an amazing story. This morning, we're going to bring you a presentation by someone, another woman. I've gotten to know her recently. She's an amazing person with an amazing story. Her name is Beatrice Querel. She's from Lorient, France, and she works for Alliance Française, which is kind of a nonprofit organization that tries to bridge the gap with the United States. If you want to learn French language, if you want to learn French wine, I'm going to learn the French wine. She is the person to talk to, and she is going to bring us a story, and it's a personal story because it all happened in the area of Lorient where she's from. She's going to tell us about submarine warfare and the submarine pens in the area of Brittany in France. And it's going to be absolutely amazing. I've looked at it. I've talked to her. She's incredibly dynamic. She is, by the way, she's a naturalized American citizen from France. I think this is going to be incredible. So I'm not going to say any more. I'm going to welcome her to the stage, Miss Beatrice Querel. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Matt. Thank you.
We're having a small problem.
All right, that's fine.
Keep talking.
All right, well, first of all, thank you very much for having me today. Thank you for the introduction, Matt. Again, my name is Beatrice. I come from France, Brittany. Yes, you want me here? Ta-da! All right, I'm going to be here. I'm French. I'm going to share my age because it's linked to our story, and it's important. I was born in 1971, which means that my mom was born in 1945, exactly in May 31st, 1945. That's my mom. Which then, you do a little bit of the math, and then realize that my grandmother and my grandfather decided, because they always said that they controlled their pregnancies, they decided to have a last child when the Americans landed in Normandy. So basically, my mom was born May 31st, 1945, 11 months after the Americans landed in Normandy. And this is key because I am the last person, the last direct person who tells stories about my grandmother's stories. And I grew up in Brittany with my grandmothers telling and sharing stories of the German occupation in Germany, but also of the Americans coming and free France. And that's what we're going to talk about today, but we're going to talk about a little town in Brittany. Alors, can I use this? I'm going to try. Up. Yeah. Tack. All right, so who knows Normandy? All Americans know where Normandy is. Who has been in Normandy? Who has been in Brittany? Yeah, awesome. So Normandy is in this coast here. Brittany is all that square here. And I come from that little town here called Lorient. And Lorient and Brittany is actually a very nice area with a lot of beaches. As you can see, it's still little villages like this. And I hope at the end of this presentation, you're going to all want to go and visit Brittany because it's beautiful. So you still have little villages like this, one. And you have the most beautiful beaches in the entire world. Blue water, green water, nice sand. So this is where I grew up. Just going to share those images. All right? This is where I grew up. But this is all also, what you see along the coast of Brittany. Do you guys know what that wall is? That's the part of the Atlantic wall that is built all along the coast. And these pictures is from today. So basically, we're in 2023, 24, almost 25, and we still have that wall along the coast. And we have those bunkers also along the coast. And I grew up with those bunkers all along the coast with our parents and my grandmother and my grandparents telling us, you're not allowed to go in it. All kids who grew up on the beach in Brittany, basically we had one thing, we were all free, but we had one thing that we were not allowed to do, is to go inside those bunkers. And I still say the same thing to my kids, by the way. You're not allowed to go inside. Why?
They're evil.
Yeah, there was still some kind of ammunition, but we still have that, bad feeling about those. So going back to Brittany, again, this is Brest at the end of Brittany, which Brest is Denver's sister city. And Brest and my city, Lorient, which is here, have a very similar story. Okay. So, can I go back? If I zoom a little bit on that little star here in Lorient, you'll see that actually Lorient is in a bay, so it's very well protected. You have one island here along the coast. To go inside the port of Lorient, you have to enter in that bay. So it's very, very well protected. Unlike Brest, who's a little bit right on the ocean. So Lorient was a thriving city before the war. I'm talking about World War II, of course. It was a city that's been that has grown economically by sharing and trading with India. So a lot of spices were coming to the port of Lorient. Lorient was also always been a military port. So you have the Navy from the, you have the Royal Navy based in Lorient. It's also a fishing port. So it was basically a thriving city. Oh, you don't see that much, but beautiful port. It's very nice. But then, June 1940 is the fall of France. And along with that is the fall of Brittany and the fall of Lorient. Even though the Britons, they tried to fight the German, and what they were trying to have, of hoping to get was, because France, just like, I'm not going to say they gave up, but, fell. The Britons have a very strong identity, and they were trying to hope or to have an independent Brittany, and on the other side, the Germans. But the Germans move in because they had all the coast of the all the Atlantic coast that they wanted to control. So when they came to Lorient, they realized that it was the perfect spot to put their navy, the Kriegsmarine. So what they did is they decided to control all the Atlantic coast because they wanted to block Great Britain from having supply. So by controlling the coast, they could protect themselves, but also destroy any ship going to Great Britain. So what they did is, within 3 years, they built 5 submarines bases along the coast. One in Brest, one in Lorient, one in Saint-Nazaire, one in La Rochelle, and one in Bordeaux. Those constructions there are going to become a nightmare for the Allies. Lorient submarine base was the biggest one of all. Why? Because he could harbor all their submarines. It was very well protected. And because of that, those submarines could go there and stay for a long time and be repaired. So here's the, I mean, you have to give the Germans a lot of credit because the way they built that thing is like pretty, in like 3 years, is just unbelievable. They had cheap labor, free labor, but you know. So they built the Lorient submarine between 1941 and 1943. It was directly under the order of Adolf Hitler. They pour almost 1 million cubic meter of concrete there. They had at least 15,000 free labor workers working on those on the construction of the submarine in Lorient. So you have to imagine that they do the same thing in Brest, the same thing in Saint-Nazaire, the same thing in Bordeaux. That forced labor was prisoner of war, or it was also men that were forced to work. You also have men that were sent from Spain that were in camp there and then put them in trains and go work there. And Lorient submarine base became the largest German submarine base and the largest military monument built outside of Germany during that time. The base was capable of sheltering 30 submarines and for a very long stay. So those pictures that I'm going to show you are part of the archives of Lorient. So this is, here is the bay if you want to, and they're going to put 3 big monuments there. It's called K1, K2, and K3, which is part of the submarine base. So that picture is from 1941. It's massive, I can tell you. It's like, so their engineering was very, I'm going to say advanced somehow. They knew they were going to become a target. So I'm going to try to go back a little bit. What they had is like massive concrete wall. And here you can see they're going to put an empty space. And above this, they're going to put another 10 foot or 10 feet of concrete. All right? And it's still there. So why are they going to do that? Because it's going to be indestructible. Do you see that? So that's the aerial picture. So you have K1, K2, and K3. All of those are submarine pens. I'll give you some pictures from the inside. Those are pictures from today. All right. So because of the strength of the Germans there, because they have that shelter of submarines there, it really became a target from the Allies. So in 1942, the Allies tried to bomb the submarine base, and they dropped bombs on that submarine, on those pens. Those pens got bombs on them, but it's still there, never collapsed. But by doing so, they also destroyed the city. So basically, Lorient in 1942 was bombed by more than 60,000 bombs, you can imagine. So the civilians, they knew, they were warned, like they could shelter under some anti-bomb shelters that you can still visit today if you go to Lorient. But basically, Lorient is believed to be the French city the most bombed during the war after Dunkirk. And I'm sure you all know about Dunkirk, but not much people know about Lorient. So that city was completely destroyed just because they tried to destroy the submarine base. So you can see the plane, the Allies. And that's not even after the war. It's like during the war. During the war, 1942. It's a long time before the Americans arrive. It's a very long time. That was the church. So 80% of the town is destroyed by 1943, 1944. Finally, June 6, 1944. So there I can tell you my grandmother, who lived just outside of Lorient, was like, finally, yeah, they're coming. They're going to save us. June 6, 1944. The Americans, basically, just to give you an idea of time, the Americans arrived in Paris in August. So 2 months later, they arrive in Lorient at the same time as they arrive in Paris. They arrive outside of Lorient. But the war is not over. So, August 7th, 1944, Americans with the Allies arrive close to Lorient to take control. They will fail. 25,000 Germans have been asked to stay in Lorient to protect the submarine base. Same thing that's going to happen to Brest. They're going to defend that town for almost a year. They're going to surrender 2 days after the whole Third Reich will surrender. So even though my grandparents was like, yeah, 1944, the Americans are coming, they're going to save us, they're going to free us. Well, no, it was a long time. Not only it was a long time, but a lot of people died in that war as well. You have to imagine 25,000 Germans in one city, 25,000 Nazis try to defend, and you have the Americans, the British, the French trying to take back that city, but they could not. They could not take it back. So they had to wait like a year. They finally, went in because the Germans surrendered. So here you have some American troops going to the streets of Lorient. Just to give you an idea, my grandma was dressed this way. You don't see that too much anymore, but but she was like this. Up. but the city is all destroyed. I mean, really all destroyed. So here, usually, the story ends, and then we're going to rebuild, and da-da-da-da-da-da. And then the Americans go back to the US, but it's not quite what happened. Because 80% of the city was destroyed, the population needed huge amount of help and housing. Well, the French government was all broken, everybody was broken. So they had to respond to the needs of the population. So here's what happened. The Americans help France to rebuild. That's the Marshall Plan. Usually we give money, but this is not what happened because we didn't have any supply, we didn't have anything to do. So what happened was the Americans built more than 5,000, 6,000 houses in Washington, D.C. They put those houses on a boat, they shipped them, and 80% of those houses were in Lorient. We had 40,000, they are made of wood, they're like prefab, pre-kit, housings or houses. Yeah, nobody knows that. Nobody knows, the after the war and how the Americans helped France and Lorient and Brest to just come to life. So 4,000 houses are built in Washington, D.C., put on a boat, in kits, shipped. Those houses arrive in Lorient, and we all think that, or they thought that those houses were going to be used for maybe a year, 2 years, 3 years until we were rebuilt. Well, actually, those houses were used until 1970. We still had people of my generation who grew up in those houses. And today, if you go to Lorient, and I hope one day you'll come, we kept a couple of those houses for people to visit and to remember. But basically, the Americans, the Germans destroyed the city, our country, but the Americans free our country, but also helped us to become who we are today. Today, this is the submarine base. And Lorient is a very thriving city. It's thankful to the Americans. Yes?
How are those pens used now? What are they used for?
That's a very good question. It's funny because there was a very strange relationship with those pens and that base. And right after the war, for example, my grandmother, my mother, they really didn't want to see those buildings. They really don't. We don't like to see them. That base, the submarine base, was taken over by the French Navy from the 50s until the 80s, 90s, I think the 80s in Lorient. So we had French submarine there, but not anymore. So what you have today, so that's what you see today. But what we have today is basically this. They built an ocean museum, a marine museum here. Right there, you have a submarine museum, so you can visit submarine and you can have the history of that submarine base. So here's the K1, K2, and K3, and here, what they're doing is we are building racing boats.
Oh,
I'm going to show you some.
Building what?
racing boat.
Racing boats.
Yeah. Yeah, America Cup racing boat.
Germans should have had those. Then they could have run away quick.
Yeah, no. You know what? I think we built that thing. I mean, under their orders, but you know. Another, funny story is during the pandemic. So like 2 years ago, this place there became a vaccination center. So, I mean, we went in those buildings to get vaccinated, and I can tell you, they were so well protected. I mean, we felt safe there, that's for sure. But basically today, it's a tourist place. It's a very nice place to hang, because again, I don't have that direct link with war. So I don't mind going there and have a drink. I don't think my grandmother would do that. But basically now you can have a very nice drink. There are a couple of restaurants. You can see those beautiful racing boats. They compete to the ocean race and the America's Cup. I think that's it. But it became it's a beautiful city. And I really welcome you to come and see the ocean race. It took the city a very long time to decide what to do with it. And I think time did its work in the sense that 30, 40 years ago, I don't think we could have imagined doing a tourist place or a pleasant place with this. I think everybody wanted to forget about it. And the city has been rebuilt, and the city is today very, very, very beautiful. And this is the end of my presentation, and I welcome any questions.
As a tourist site, do you get many people coming from Germany to visit there?
It's funny. We don't see that many Germans there. The interesting part is when Germans have come to Lorient, and I'm talking about people from my generation or my kids' generation. My kids, they know the Germans were here. My kids know that the submarine was based by Germans. My kids know that the Atlantic Wall is part of World War II. Talking to young Germans that come, they don't know. They don't know. There is a part of their, and I can't blame them too for what their great-grandparents did somehow. But we don't have that many Germans coming over there. We have a fair amount of British, and the British will go there because, they fought for us too.
And the beaches.
And the beaches, yes. But, yeah. So German, we don't see them much. They will stay in the east part of France, I think, or in Paris.
Germany had a U-boat thing in World War I. Was this coast part of that?
I don't know. So I need
The Germans didn't get that far south in France. They were pretty much up on the Belgian-French line.
on the.
Okay, so they left from there to go into the Atlantic.
They
Yeah.
never held that part of France in World War I.
Okay.
In World War II, they really, they built to protect themselves and to block any supply for Great Britain, but they also envision having those ports for their economical growth after the war. And they had that vision too. They really thought that they were going, I think they thought that the Americans will never come. I think Pearl Harbor, I mean, the Japanese made a big mistake by going to Pearl Harbor. I think that's what triggered the thing. Any other questions? Yes,
Do you have any idea how the U-boat ended up at University of Chicago on Lake Michigan, that they toured, people can walk in the U-boat?
me, I don't know. Maybe some.
That was captured.
German.
I'm from Chicago, and that was captured. And they brought it to the Field Museum, but it was one of the ones that was captured during the war.
U-505.
Yeah.
You know, in the Bay of Lorient too, talking about, you know, that you have boats that has sunk, and today you can scuba dive and just go visit those boats that are in the Bay of Lorient. Yeah, they're still there.
Do you know how many people were involved in the resistance and how many of them made it through the war?
In the French resistance, me, myself, I don't know. I'm going to put a disclaimer, I'm not a historian. The thing that, you know, I think it was a very difficult time. I think a small percentage of people were resistant. A big percentage of French people were also, you know, not good people. They were helping and then I think a lot of people became resistant also when the Americans arrived. The thing that I know though is that in the American history book, we don't talk too much about the role of General de Gaulle, who was in London trying to coordinate the resistance with France and help the Americans also land in Normandy. And that sometimes we forget about that as well. But I think in time of war, it's always difficult to know who is good, who is bad, who falls into the good. And it's funny because this war is very simple. You had the good and the bad, and there is no in between. You know, we were not fighting for oil, we were not fighting for resources. Here we were really fighting for freedom. But I don't know, to answer your questions. I don't know. The thing that I know is without the resistance, and a lot of resistance died and got tortured, but without the resistance, it would have make the operation of freeing the country way more difficult. But we also have the people who help the Germans, and without those people, I think it would have been more difficult for the Germans also to send, you know, people in camps.
I'm wondering about the submarines at the end of the war. How many might have been docked there at the end of the war, and whether Lorient was the place where they brought in the submarines after the surrender of the Germans? Did they surrender their submarines to your town?
Nope, I don't think so. But I think I have to come back with all those questions about the after the war. But that's a great question, though. I think
if they had a few hundred submarines, something had to happen with all of them at the end of the.
I think they were all sized by you guys.
Did we take them over? Did we?
I'm going to find out.
They were given instructions to surrender to the nearest, allied force. So many of them just kind of surfaced, and then the British took over, and we captured some of them.
Yeah, because
And others just came back to port because they were being decimated by 1944.
I mean, basically the Germans were not allowed to have any army after the war. So, I mean, I get all their equipments got into Great Britain, France, and the US.
One thing I was going to ask was, it sounds like the relationship between Germany and France, as of now, is still uneasy?
No.
No?
France and Germany, this is where you have to give credit to those two countries. And this is where, when you have two countries that are enemies or fought for so long, actually there is hope, because France and Germany economically became the best friends ever. So and that's because of, or thanks to Helmut Kohl and François Mitterrand. And in the 80s, they decided to really create Europe. And the reason why there is such a strength in Europe today, it's because of the friendship between France and Germany. Now, that's the economical link between the two. I can tell you, though, that my mom still has resentment towards Germans. And she can't look at a German Shepherd dog. I mean, seriously, it's like, so they, even though my mom did not grow up with them, but her mom did. So it's still an interesting relationship, but it's also a relationship that has proven that peace is possible between two countries that have fought for so long. So, you know, I don't know if you can relate to any other place in the world, but.
They also established after the war sister cities between Germany and France, and people visiting each other by buses and staying in each other's homes to learn that the other person is just as good as you are.
Yeah, you know.
Like Hamburg is a sister city to Marseille.
Yeah, that's true. I don't know when did they do that right after the war?
I think it took a few years before they started.
We had to rebuild.
According to what I'm reading, the Germans surrendered 156 submarines to the Allied forces after the war. And the Allies took 116 of them out and sunk them.
Oh, gosh. Here we go. Thank you. I'm going to add that to my presentation. Yes, sir.
My grandfather served in World War I and was on the Argonne line in the trenches, you know, between Germany and France. And I just wonder, is the Argonne line, do they still have any trenches and so forth between Germany and France? Does that still exist?
There's a lot of them. You can go to the Somme, and I mean, you can look at the land, and I mean, you can see the bomb craters and the trenches. Now, you know, after 100 years, erosion has softened the look of these, but you can still look and see that, well, you know, they never filled them all.
Where they serve,
yeah. You can still see them.
I've heard there's still bombs being.
Oh, they still dig them up.
Oh, here they still dig them up too. I mean, that's one of the reasons why we were not allowed to go into the plane to those bunkers, is because once in a while, there was still some like, yeah.
They were booby trapped.
Yep, under the, and even in the Bay of Lorient, because some boats have sunk there, but they've sunk, you know, with ammunition or bombs. So once in a while, they go and dig.
Actually,
The French military actually has a department.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you, sir.
tour a portion of the Maginot Line today.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Other portions have been turned into whatever the farmer who lived above them wanted it to be. You might use it for grain storage, or you might use it for storing wine, or just to make a basement in his house. And And when we toured the Maginot Line, the German tour groups far outnumbered all the rest of us. The French and the British and the Americans did have a near thing. But nonetheless, you can tour, it's quite interesting.
Did your grandparents ever talk about how they survived the war? What their life was like?
So my grandmother, I didn't know my grandfather because he passed when before I was born. But my grandmother so she was living in a small village outside of Lorient, and she had a big house and basically a grocery store, if you want to, and a restaurant and a cafe. And you know, it's a part of the story that you'd never quite know. The thing that I know is Germans were in her house. And the thing that I know, it's in order for them not to understand what they were saying, is that she was talking Britons, the Brittany dialect. And because she couldn't understand what they were saying, but the Germans were basically in her house because she had a big house and because she had a retail store. So they were like basically helping themselves. Now, you know, it's the kind of, I don't know if she was friendly with them, if she was, the thing that I know is she was happy that the Americans came, that's for sure. But, you know, how exactly, see, today, I think I would love to ask her more questions about, were you scared? Were you friendly with them? Or, you know, what's that relationship? And because when you have your grandparents telling you stories like this, you listen to exactly what they say, but you don't necessarily relate to them as being a human, you know, like with feelings of fears, of hate, so I don't know. They survive by working with them somehow, because they also had no choice. I mean, they had the choice to fight. I'm not saying that, but I think it's a decision that is really difficult to take when you have 4 kids. That's that to take into account too. So I don't know.
All the French people suffered greatly because the Germans came in and pretty much took all the food that they could. And I've seen pictures of massive train cars where they looted the country. I mean, they took all the artwork.
Yes.
You know, then they took all the furniture and appliances, and I mean...
And food.
So they stole so much from the country that the people that were left there had a very difficult time surviving because they didn't even have enough to eat. And Holland really suffered. In 1944, they starved.
Now, my grandparents, you know, they were living, as I said, in that small village. And basically at that time, everybody owned 2 cows, chickens, and new basic agricultural. But everything was stolen from them, that's for sure. Everything was stolen.
Was there a Jewish population in that side of France, in Brittany?
No.
When they first made the
Really, no. Really, when they came, it was to control the Atlantic Ocean.
Right, yeah.
It was to control the resources and the Atlantic Ocean. But there's nothing about, you know, at the end, yeah. We don't have that population. I mean, we don't have Jewish people in Brittany, even today.
Okay.
They're in Paris.
So how long were they in Vichy?
Most people are not aware that Cheyenne Mountain, which was Canadian and U.S. NORAD headquarters inside the mountain, virtually everything built inside there was built by the Navy. Those are all submarines that were put into tunnels inside the mountain, and they're all joined by hallways and so forth. I had the privilege of going and seeing the NORAD headquarters there. And now they've moved everything out to Schriever Air Force Base out east, but they used to have joint command between the Canadians and the U.S. in Colorado Springs. At Cheyenne.
Is that right? Oh,
It
yeah.
was all built by the Navy, all
Yeah.
the internal buildings, and they're all on springs so that they would be, at even a direct hit, atomic bomb hit would not damage the NORAD headquarters. And because of that, they have the most intense fiber optics lines between there and Omaha because of the SAC headquarters in Omaha, Nebraska, and Colorado Springs. And now they use most of that, all that extra telecommunications for telemarketing.
But
Okay. That was amazing. The story was amazing, but more important, the storyteller was amazing.
Oh, thank you. No, thank you for having me. Just thank you for having me and sharing, my story, my family's story as well. I think it's very important that we keep remembering because it's linked to our history today too. So thank you, Matt, for having me.
One last thing, as you all know, this is a challenge coin, and we are going to present this to you this morning. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And you are always welcome here on behalf of
And I
the
will come back.
Broomfield Veterans Museum. You have made everyone's life better, and we appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Matt. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
No, thank you. Thank you for being here. Thanks.
Thank you, it was really well done.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Did you say your grandmother was born in 1935?
My mom was born in 1945. My mom. My grandmother was born in 1917, I think. My grandmother lived through 2 wars, but my grandmother had my mom, or conceived my mom, when just right after the Americans landed in Normandy.
I was born in 1935. I'm almost 90.
Well, my grandmother is not here anymore, but my mom is 79 years old, and she was born in 45.
Yeah, I'll be 90 in January.
Oh my gosh! You were born in 1935?
Yes.
Okay, so you were 10.
Yeah. That was very interesting.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Hey, you're very welcome.
Keeping these stories alive.
Yeah, I think it's important.
Definitely so. They had a presentation here about a month ago by a Finnish woman. My late husband was Finnish, he said, and she talked about
What, too?
with her family in trying to fight the Russians and then becoming an ally with Germany for their own survival.
Oh yeah,
All of those stories from people here. My parents were born in Spain.
in Spain.
And they left early with their families to work in the Hawaiian Islands, labor, and then to the mainland. But they never talked about anything, and I'm so sorry now that I didn't ask them the questions about their experience.
Even me, I would love to ask them more questions.
I know, we don't do that. And they don't talk freely because they experience so much, I think, and just, to survive and just keep going and establish a good life for themselves, for their children.
I think it's a survival mode. Yeah, you're right. Right. Yeah, they want to move. And maybe they don't want to bother us too, but I don't know.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you for being here.
I enjoyed it very much.
Thank you so much.
1961. 100 years to the day. And we enlisted in the Army.
Thank you.
My enlistment date was a little early.
Good information. And I have brothers that were in the service, Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marines. I have
yeah, them all. Are you from Broomfield?
in Westminster. So.
Okay.